Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Network Management Megatrends 2018. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Shamus McGillicuddy, Senior Analyst at Enterprise Management Associates. Seamus has more than 10 years of experience in the IT industry, primarily as a journalist covering the network infrastructure market. Prior to joining EMA, Seamus was the news director for TechTarget's networking publications. And before I hand things over to Seamus, I wanted today's audience to know that you can log your questions anytime by using the Q&A functionality. Seamus will be dedicating the last 5 or 10 minutes to answering your questions, so feel free to log those anytime. And today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA that will include the on-demand playback as well as some additional information on this new research report. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Shamus McGillicuddy. Shamus?
Thank you, Raleigh. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I see some familiar names in the roster of attendees. So today we're doing some highlights from my new Network Management Megatrends research. This is a biennial study that EMA does going back to, I think, 2008, I think was the first time we did this. Before I go into the research, just want to recognize the sponsors. Corville, Ipswich, Kentic, NetBrain, Riverbed, Sabius, 7-1, all vendors known for providing network management, network monitoring solutions. Thank you for your support in helping this research happen. And let's go over the agenda real quick. We're going to talk about research goals and methodology and demographics just to set some context, and then I'm going to talk about some of the drivers of network management decision making these days. We've seen some shifts there that I think are pretty interesting since 2016, the last time we did the research. Then we'll talk about the state of enterprise network operations, just looking at a couple of things we noticed in the research that gives you an idea of how network managers are running networks today. And then we'll look at the megatrends. These are trends that we either targeted specifically or saw emerge from the data, just looking at macro trends and micro trends that are emerging as things that are particularly interesting in the network management world, the enterprise network management world. The first one has to do with the fragmented network management tool set that is a nagging issue that continues to plague the world. Cloud services in the network, just looking at how migration of applications to the cloud are impacting the networking team. NetSecOps, which is a term I coined, I think, although I don't plan on promulgating it and making it a term that everyone has to talk about. It's just a shorthand for the context of this research. It's the notion of network operations and security operations converging and collaborating. Then number 4 is network automation, and finally network management outsourcing. We saw some interesting things there. So let's talk about research goals and etc. This research, as I said, comes out every 2 years, and it's aimed at recognizing and investigating shifts, significant and minor, in managed networks and the network management technologies that enterprises use to manage those networks. Also, we want to explore any macro trends that are affecting network management. This means that every 2 years we survey enterprise network professionals. This year it was 250 IT pros directly involved in networking management in some way. As you see, 66% of them said they're managing networks with the tools that we asked them about. 54% said they were planning networks. 57% were evaluating. 54% were approving and purchasing. In terms of demographics, here's a busy slide that tells you everything we know about them. Well, not everything. These are just the most interesting things or most relevant things. Roles. 30% were IT executives, so that's VP of IT or higher. So CIOs, CTOs, people in the IT executive suite. 70% were IT staff and middle management. Nothing lower than, or not. We excluded admins, so any tier 1 technicians and stuff like that. So it's more like subject matter experts and above. So engineers, architects, IT directors, business analysts. Company size kind of spread out over the enterprise. We wanted a minimum of 250 global employees to sort of set a minimum size for small enterprises. You see it's kind of spread out over small, medium, and large. significant number were from organizations with 20,000 or more employees, I think about 10% or so. Revenue, you see about a little over half are sub $100 million companies and 17% are $1 billion plus companies. We didn't target any specific industries, but 18 emerged in the survey. These are the ones that are most significant: software, finance, manufacturing, unrelated to IT. We segment that from the IT manufacturers. And then IT-related professional services organizations and retail, wholesale distribution companies. Geography, we set a minimum of 25% for Europe, so it gets sort of cross-Atlantic view of what's happening in enterprise networking. So 75% were from North America, that includes Canada. And Europe was mostly targeting people working out of the UK, Germany, and France. These are the managed environments that we captured in the survey. So you see the bulk of them are somewhere between 250 and 5,000 network devices. So that's switches, routers, access points, Wi-Fi access points, load balancers, and things like that, specifically excluding things like end client devices, servers, storage, power supplies. And then we also captured information on how many remote sites they have. So you see 100 or more sites, that's a third of the sample. A quarter of them were rather less distributed, fewer than 20 sites connected to a WAN. So let's talk about drivers of network management decision making. The IT initiatives we asked them to identify the IT initiatives driving their network management priorities, their decisions. And in the past, server virtualization has dominated this list. It was always at the top by a wide margin. 2 years ago, it was number one driver. 49% said identified it as a driver, and there was a 12 or 13% spread between it and the next most common response. And that was a pattern we saw for years, going back at least until 2012, I think. And I think this represents the long tail of the first wave of server virtualization, where people were focused on workload consolidation and the networking impacts of that. The rising need for east-west traffic, engineering traffic running east-west. You need a lot of bandwidth. You need a lot of bandwidth at the rack for these workloads that are consolidating on individual hosts. And they're really focused on static environments with lots of virtualization. And things like software-defined data centers and private clouds or further down the list of things that are driving their decisions, middle of the pack type of things, secondary things to worry about in the future. Here, software-defined data centers are now at the top of the list in public cloud, in the networking implications of that, top of the list, and private cloud at the top of the list. And there's server virtualization still hanging around, but now it's no longer the dominant mind share that once had. Now enterprise network management professionals are clearly shifting towards the next generation of architectures that they need to support. It's no longer the workload consolidation wave that started long ago. It's now the dynamic architectures, the cloud architectures that are becoming important. And you'll see that play out in the next slide, where we ask, what are the networking initiatives that are driving your priorities? And in 2016, network security and WAN optimization sat at the top, and network security kind of stood alone at the top with a wide gap between it and WAN optimization and the rest of the field. And things like SDN and stuff like that was towards the bottom of the list of priorities. Now, network security still sits at the top, but with it is data center SDN. Now that is huge. That is a huge shift. They're looking at it more seriously than they were 2 years ago. Or 4 years ago. Network operations optimization is something that we added to the list of multiple choice options in this question, and it immediately jumped to the top. So that's things like improving SLAs, accelerating MTTR, MTTI, and Wi-Fi upgrades and refreshes are also at the top. That was something that was kind of in mid-level 2 and 4 years ago, and that's kind of at the top, and that sort of points to the fact that I think the 11N to 11AC shift and wave 1 to wave 2 shift is kind of getting a little dominant mind share among these guys. And you see network virtualization of routers, load balancers, etc., is up there. WAN optimization, which for years and years and years was number 2, and that it was indicative of people trying to sort of sweat MPLS, get the most out of the bandwidth that they were able to get from MPLS. Now it's a secondary issue, and here it is tied at 36% of them with software-defined WAN, which is really the technology that's going to transform wide area networking. So that's pretty interesting. So let's shift from that to the state of enterprise network operations. And 47% of these guys told us that they are successful with network operations. The rest were somewhat successful, neutral feeling about things, and a very small number saying completely unsuccessful. These guys are usually pretty positive in assessing themselves. Very few people ever say we're a total failure or we're somewhat failing. They always want to put a positive spin on things, even in an anonymous survey. But yeah, so but less than half gave themselves an A. So that's something we use to sort of crosstab and do some crosstab analysis to figure out like what these guys are doing differently from those who are less gung-ho about their own success. But that's something you'll see analyzed more extensively in the full report that's published this last night, I think. So how do they measure success? We asked them to identify things that are becoming more important to how they and their organization measure the network operations team success. And security risk reduction, service quality, improved network visibility, these are all the things that are at the top of the list. The bottom of the list was SLA compliance, uptime / downtime. Those things, the things that network managers have always measured themselves against, are not as important as they used to be. They want to reduce security risk. They want to look at overall IT service quality. They want to improve their end-to-end network visibility. They're worried about application performance and end-user experience instead of uptime, and they're thinking about cloud readiness. The security risk reduction thing is something we'll explore in the megatrends in a moment. We also like to ask them every year, what are the data sources you use for your general network management tasks? And this is a question that tends to fluctuate a lot every 2 years. It tends to reflect what's hot. What's hot in the market, what are people evaluating and thinking is going to solve all their problems, basically. That doesn't always work out, but sometimes it does. In 2014, for instance, the top answer to all these questions for what data are using for capacity planning, for availability monitoring and performance monitoring, troubleshooting, it was logs. The top response was logs everywhere, or maybe it was the second response. It was topping every list, and I think that was because there was a lot of hype around log analytics at the time, and everyone was like, oh, we should open up Splunk to the network team so they can work with us on this, and blah blah blah, and not to say that was hype that wasn't justified, but it's now no longer at the top of the list 4 years later. 2 years ago, it was NetFlow had sort of become hotter again and is still pretty hot, but it had risen to the top. Now we see a couple of things at the top that haven't been there in the past. One of them is management system APIs. Number 4 choice for capacity planning and engineering. Number 2 choice for sustained monitoring. Number 1 choice for troubleshooting. What is that? That's integration. That's pulling data from vSphere. That's pulling data from AWS. That's pulling data from other tools the network management team is using so they can get an end-to-end view of what's happening. So they can correlate data, so they can integrate workflows, so they can eliminate tool fragmentation. They are looking at APIs. That means you need to have tools with open APIs, open REST APIs, so that you can integrate your tools with other technologies. It also means you want your vendors to have good technology partner ecosystems, so they're partnering with you want your network monitoring tool to partner with the SD-WAN vendor, for instance, so you can pull specific metrics from that SD-WAN solution. The other thing is active testing solutions have become really important in recent years for getting visibility in things like SaaS, end-user experience, things like that. So you see that also at the top of the list for performance monitoring. And you also see device APIs there, people using APIs to pull metrics instead of SNMP polling and traps and stuff. Most of the rest of the stuff on this list is not too surprising. So elements of network operations success or failure. Network problem detection. Every 2 years we ask them what percentage of IT service problems, network service problems, are detected by end users and reported to the help desk before network operations is aware. And it's usually a pretty static result. 39% of all problems are causing pain for end users before network operations detects them. 39% this year. 2 years ago was 40%. So that number hasn't changed that much. It's pretty static. It's pretty much status quo. We'd love to see that number go down. It does go down depending on how you cross-tab the data. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Division of network management tasks in a given week. Reactive troubleshooting and proactive problem prevention pretty much dominate people's time. Only a quarter of their time spent on other tasks. That includes strategic projects. That number has gone down since 2 years ago. 2 years ago, these guys were spending about 29% of their time. I think it was a little over 29% of their time on strategic projects. So it dropped a little. Hopefully it goes back up in 2 years. But this is generally what you see and what you hear, that enterprises spend, or network managers and enterprises spend about 2/3 of their time at least on just fixing problems rather than delivering specific value to the enterprise. What kind of challenges do they face? These are the top 4 challenges to successful network operations. Shortage of skilled personnel, lack of end-to-end network visibility. Those are always at the top. Fragmented management tools, number 4. That was more middle of the pack 2 years ago. It's a little higher now. And right there, lack of usage policy and enforcement is also an issue for them. The most time-consuming aspects of diagnostics and troubleshooting. This is a question we haven't asked before. We gave them about 8 or 9 different stages of your typical troubleshooting process to get a sense of which ones eat into their time the most. Problem identification, number 1, so that's information gathering and system analysis and just kind of figuring out what's going on. Planning and implementing a fix and verifying success of that fix were both at the top of the list as well as testing and proving a root cause theory after you've come up with a root cause theory. The least time-consuming thing was documenting your findings, and I think that's because not everyone has time to do that, so they don't consider it time-consuming. It's something they just don't get to. But I recommend that they do as much as possible. So, megatrend number 1, the fragmented network management toolset. This is something I talked about 2 years ago as well, but you see here we asked them, how many tools does the network management team use to monitor and troubleshoot your network? These are tools that are actually being used, not necessarily shelfware. So about half of them are using somewhere between 4 and 10 tools. The low end of that range is nice. The high end of that range is a little crowded. 27% using 11 or more. That's pretty high. The network teams that use 11 or more tools, they tend to have a few issues. They detect fewer network problems. They only detect 55% of problems before end users are affected, whereas those guys that use 1 to 3 tools, they detect 70% of problems. They suffer 3 times as many outages, IT-related outages and service problems per year as the organizations that use just 1 to 3 tools. And they're 1.6 times more likely to say that their team struggles with end-to-end visibility than those guys that use 1 to 3 tools. So that's those are challenges. Now there are reasons why an organization might have a large tool set, so, and those reasons might actually be contributing to these numbers to some extent as well. But these are statistical correlations we're seeing here between number of tools and effectiveness. And it points to a need for improving the integration of the tools you use, being more strategic about the tools you choose to use. But it also, but there are mitigating factors. For instance, we found that the organizations that had larger numbers of devices in their network and more remote sites connected to their wide area network tended to have more tools. The more complex your network, the more tools you might need. Organizations that are experiencing strong budget growth in the IT organization also tended to have more tools. which indicates that they might throw money at a problem. They see a problem. They see an issue where they're lacking tool capability. They might just buy a new tool instead of asking their existing vendor if there's a module they can add or something that can be extended. Like, oh, you know what? We need visibility into this public cloud environment. Let's buy a tool that does that. Instead of, hey, you're our strategic IT management vendor. Do you have a feature that we don't know about? So those are things that you should keep in mind when you're adopting new technologies. Can you extend your existing tools, or do you really need new tools? It's just something to ask yourself before you just throw money at a problem. These are some other challenges associated with large tool sets. Network teams that have that 11 or more tools in use, they are more likely to resist or reject collaboration with the security group. And one of the challenges they have with collaboration with the security group is a lack of defined processes and best practices for that collaboration. And I think that is a tooling issue. I think if you don't have the right if you don't have a good consolidated tool set where you have one data set that you can consult and share with the security group, you're not going to be able to establish best practices. You're not going to be able to say, here's a dependency map of all the services and how they're affected by security incidents. There's no basis for communication and collaboration if you have 7 or 8 tools that you have to put together the story of what's going on with your network. They also are more likely to resist using network automation for closed-loop operations, and they're more likely to spend more time assembling the right team of stakeholders during a troubleshooting process, which I think is another indication of everyone's in their own tool, and it's kind of hard to figure out who's got the information you need to figure out a problem. And they also struggle more with documenting a troubleshooting event. On the flip side, counterintuitive to everything I just talked about, organizations that have large tool sets are more likely to say that they're successful overall with network operations. It's important to note that organizations that have large tool sets are also more likely to have more budget, and I think that's a huge indicator of whether or not someone's successful. Actually, there is a correlation between perception of network operations success and the health of their budget, based on this research and past research. And also I think organizations that have a lot of complexity in the network, as organizations do when they have 11 more tools, they tend to have complex networks. They tend to consider it a win if they can just fix a problem fast rather than prevent the problem from being felt. So they might have a different bar for success. But also, those organizations that have a lot of tools, they also tend to be adopting things more aggressively, like SDN, hybrid clouds, and maybe they're feeling successful about their ability to support new technology initiatives. Hard to say. I'd love to dig deeper in this in the future. Megatrend number 2 is cloud services in the network. So we're seeing some saturation of enterprise networks in the public cloud. No surprise when we asked enterprises to identify the types of applications that are available, that are present in significant amounts on their network on a daily basis. The number one response was external public cloud traffic, more so than things like email, more so than things like voice and video. Specific cloud traceable applications are huge. And when we asked them to guess at what percentage of overall network traffic is traceable to the external cloud, the mean response to that was 45%. That number was 44% 2 years ago, so we haven't seen much of a shift there. The cloud, as I mentioned earlier, is also a major driver of decision making. We covered earlier, what are the IT initiatives that are driving your decision making these days. Public cloud and SaaS applications are both at the top of the list, and here's a reminder of that. Cloud monitoring and management strategies. Existing tools are usually not enough for cloud management. Only 50% of these guys said they were managing and monitoring cloud networking with their existing tool set. 58% were acquiring new tools. They were kind of split over those who are acquiring those new tools to use exclusively use as their exclusive cloud monitoring tools, and those who are using a combination of new tools and existing tools to handle their cloud management issues. And then a small number, 14%, said that they're still looking for a solution. And about, I think it was either 11 or 12% said that their network management team does not monitor the cloud. So that's something to keep in mind, is not everyone says they're dealing with this issue. Megatrend number 3, NetSecOps. So just for some context here, 42% of network managers told us that they're collaborating more with IT security than they had in the past. That was a question where we asked them to identify which groups they're in the IT organization they're collaborating with more than they had in the past, and security was at the top of the list. Network managers are, we also asked them to identify what kind of IT management systems they require their network management tools to integrate with, and security monitoring was at the top of the list. And as we mentioned earlier, enterprises are increasingly using security risk reduction as a measure of network management success. And not on this list, but probably should be, security incidents were the number 2 most common root cause of complex IT service issues. That was a question where we asked them to identify what the root causes were of their 3 most recent complex IT service issues that required collaboration across multiple domains in the IT organization. Number 1 response was networking, network infrastructure. The number 2 response was a security issue, a security incident like a breach. Number 4 response was security systems, so firewalls blocking legitimate traffic, for instance. So that points to the need for collaboration. And so we asked them to describe their current relationship with the security team. And here 40% of them said that those 2 groups were fully converged with shared tools and processes. And 35% said the rest of them had separate teams, but mostly with some kind of collaboration going on. As you see, 35% said these 2 groups had tools integrated for collaboration. 16% said they had tools that are shared for collaboration, and then 4% said they collaborated on an ad hoc basis, so not a lot of integration or collaboration formalized and probably not effective. So why and where do they collaborate? Well, the critical points of collaboration, number 1, infrastructure design and deployment. So they're not trying to figure out how to do operations monitoring and response necessarily. The big driver here is the need to build security into the network. And for the security group, they probably want the network to be more secure. It's a marriage made in heaven. Maybe, probably not. But 38% said, yeah, that's where we want to collaborate the most. And then incident monitoring and incident response was the second and third most popular answers to that question. Why are they doing it? Well, they're looking for OpEx efficiencies, they're looking for risk reduction, and they're looking for IT productivity. That is acceleration of mean time to repair, resolve, mean time to insight, things like that. So that's what's driving them. In the report, we also have lots of information about what tools they're using to facilitate that collaboration and what kind of challenges they encounter. I think one of the biggest challenges they encounter is that the security group and the networking group have different priorities and goals in this collaboration. The networking guys, they're all about connecting things. Maybe they, most likely, all of them believe in connecting responsibly, but still it's the connectivity that's the priority, not the locking down of things that the security group's concerned about. The security group will lock down data, lock down users, try to protect all assets from the boogeyman, but the networking group is pushing the other direction. So that means that they need leadership to help them resolve those conflicting goals and make sure that when they do come together like this, they're pulling in the same direction. Megatrend number 4, network automation. So 92% of enterprises said that they have initiatives in place to look for opportunities to expand automation in their network. 70% said it was a high priority. Organizations with flat and shrinking budgets were a little less likely to say it was a priority, which is no surprise, but I just want to put that in there. The top 3 tasks, general tasks that they're focused on were network optimization, security incident response, and network capacity planning. So not looking to necessarily automate responses to network trouble events, but they're looking to make their networks more efficient now and in the future. And 87% of them said they had at least some sort of closed-loop operations going on, self-healing networking. That number was pretty high to me, and probably seems pretty high to you, but they say they're doing it. They have a number of challenges in doing it, though. They're worried about taking their hand off the wheel, leading to the risk of problems, performance degradation, or outages caused by automation of that kind. And they're also struggling to find the right tools that do it. These are the tools that they do use for network automation in general. The top three should catch your eye, well, at least two of the top three, SDN and SD-WAN, in the sandwich in between, network change and configuration management, which has been around forever. Not forever, but for a while. But SDN and SD-WAN, which have been enjoying some varying waves of hype cycle over the years, look to be real-world opportunities for automation. When these technologies first came along, people just talked about how they had the power to reduce costs. But the automation piece is, I think, the value proposition these guys are seeing here, obviously. And then you see DevOps tools like Ansible, Chef, Puppet, SaltStack are pretty popular, and standard-based network automation tools. That's examples I gave them in that response were things like anything based on gang modeling and netcomp, for instance. There'll be some overlap in some of these things. Like we also asked them if they're doing intent-based networking, which can possibly be 2, maybe 3 of these responses, depending on how you interpret what that means. 31% of them said they were doing intent-based networking, or looking to use intent-based networking for automation, I should say more correctly. Why automate networks? The most important benefits to them were security risk reduction, improved collaboration across IT, rapid response to service problems, and increased network agility. What wasn't important? Driving down costs. They were not looking to save money. This is them being better partners to the business, being better partners to the security group, being better partners to the entire IT organization. Megatrend number 5, management outsourcing, network management outsourcing. So you see here the number of enterprises that tell us they're outsourcing some sort of aspect of network management is growing. This is not to scale, of course. This is just a smart object in PowerPoint. Don't expect it to be to scale. But so 36% were doing something in 2014. It went up to 51% 2 years ago, and now 58% are outsourcing something. What they're outsourcing is shifting a little bit. Top outsourcing targets in 2016 were some less strategic aspects of operations and engineering. So 24/7 network health monitoring, remote site networking is less strategic for some organizations than others. For some, it's very strategic. Layer 1 support, that's not very strategic. Off-hours network health monitoring, that's that's just to allow your engineers not to have to carry a phone with them when they go to the movies. So what's the top outsourcing targets today? Well, they're outsourcing device management configuration. So they got MSPs touching their core infrastructure in some cases. Wireless LAN networking and support. So that's a very strategic technology for a lot of companies. 24/7 network health monitoring is still there. And now look at that, data center networking and support. People are outsourcing data center networking and support. That's a very different from 2 years ago. Is this a blip or is this a shift? Are they looking at, obviously they want to focus on what they're good at. And so are they good at the new SDN technologies in data center? Hard to say. Hard to say if that's driving them to outsource it or not. Maybe for some of them they are. There are risks and benefits with outsourcing, as everyone knows. Here's what we saw. Network problem detection becomes less effective. Outsourcers detect only 54% of network problems versus non-outsourcers who detect 70%. So you got to make sure that when you outsource an MSP that they're going to be able to take a proactive approach to problem prevention. And we find that a lot of the organizations that outsource networking, they still keep the most popular thing they do with the tools that become less important. The tools that could be retired when an MSP takes over management, a lot of them hold on to those tools. The most popular thing they do with them is they keep them in service so they can monitor how good a job the MSP is doing. And I recommend everyone do that if you have the resources. Client device or user error becomes twice as likely the cause of a complex service issue when people are outsourcing. So you really need to make sure that your MSP has the ability to interact with your users, make sure your users are following best practices or are using approved devices, and things like that. There's always a danger that you lose contact with your end user community when the first line of contact is outsourced to a third party. So just make sure that you have the right processes and best practices in place with your MSP, that they don't let that happen. Troubleshooting steps that become more time-consuming when you outsource, testing, improving the root cause theory, and documenting troubleshooting findings. I think they're more likely to document findings when they're serving you. They want to document what they're doing right and wrong and show it to you. So that obviously becomes more time-consuming, but also probably becomes more time-consuming for your internal resources because you need to document things and make sure that you have that you're interacting correctly and effectively with your MSP when you're dealing with an issue. And then outsourcers are more likely to increase IT innovation via network operations success than non-outsourcers. So that means that you've freed up your valuable internal resources to do more innovative things after you outsource. That's a good thing to see. So in conclusion, next generation technologies are driving networking. We established at the beginning that we're seeing software-defined data center, private cloud, public cloud, software-defined networking, SD-WAN, network virtualization are all becoming more important or more influential on decision-making than they were in the past. And that's good news in my opinion. Network managers are still struggling with tool fragmentation, which is good and bad depending on whether or not they're taking a strategic approach to how they deal with it. Cloud is saturating enterprise networks. Network and security teams are converging, and I think that's something that we will continue to do research on in the future. Definitely, I got a project coming up next quarter on network packet brokers and how the security team and network teams co-own or try to co-own those. Network automation is a universal priority for these guys. Whether or not they're actually pulling it off remains to be seen. And enterprises are aggressively outsourcing network management tasks to increase innovation, but they have to be careful with how they do it because you can run some certain risks there. So with that, thank you very much. The report itself published yesterday. It's in our research library. There's a lot of data in there. I think it's about 70 pages long. So I didn't cover even a quarter of what's in there. But now I'll turn it back over to Raleigh for Q&A.
Great, thank you, Seamus. And I will provide a direct link to the report if you're interested in learning more about it. If you have any questions, you can log them now. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into them, Seamus. The first question is, can network automation help free up network managers so they spend more time on strategic projects and less time on troubleshooting?
Yeah, I think so. There are a lot of network automation coupled with analytics. Our research shows that enterprises that are investing in and prioritizing network analytics, and that can be analytics that's embedded in your existing network operations software solutions, or network analytics that's embedded in your infrastructure solutions like switching and routing, or maybe a network analytics specialist vendor. When they are focused on those analytics capabilities, they're almost always, like more than 90% of the time, directly supporting a network automation initiative. Our research showed that at the beginning of this year when we surveyed 200 or 250 enterprises that were directly involved in an advanced network analytics initiative of some kind. They were supporting automation. And so when you combine analytics with automation, then you have tools in place that say, hey, we see that this is going to be an issue based on trends. This is going to be an issue in like an hour, or this is going to be an issue in a week. This is why. This is how to fix it, and this is how to verify that fix worked. Tools like that are going to become important. And that's automation. That's analytics, and then it kind of introduces automation in your process because you're no longer having to do all this investigation and root cause theory and stuff like that. You just have everything laid out for you what to do, and you might make a manual fix, or maybe you have a tool that says we can do this for you and do it for you again and again and again if you let us. But that's the big step, because like I said, closed loop operations, their biggest worry is performance degradation, the risk of performance degradation because they allow something to do that. With good analytics, maybe they can learn to trust people trust the machine. So we'll see.
Good to know. Thank you, Seamus. The next question is, what is the best way to vet an MSP to ensure they're taking a proactive approach to network management?
That's not, I don't have a lot to. I don't have a lot of expert opinion there. That's one area of research I haven't had the opportunity to look into. So I don't have much to say about it other than to ask them, okay, what tools do you use? What reference customers can we talk to? What infrastructure do you have experience working with? Like, do you know how to work with? We're not necessarily a Cisco shop. You're going to be able to handle a Cisco shop. You're able to handle a Cisco shop. Can you handle a different type of vendor? Just treat it like a job interview, I guess. But that'd be a good area of research for me in the future. So maybe I'll do that, and then I can answer that question more fully.
Thanks, Seamus. Also, can you provide insight on who's offering a machine learning tool for networking today? I don't know of any. Well, let's see. A lot of people are playing around with it to varying extents. I've seen pretty much, like CA. I think I've seen CA do some. An Extra Hop. Nianza, which is an analytics specialist vendor, they do some. I think Kentic is doing some in the cloud. Live Action I've seen doing some. I think over the next couple of years, everyone's going to start working with it to some extent to see what kind of value they can add. It's not like a product thing. I don't think like everyone's going to be like, here's a network machine learning product. I think it's more about them coming up with new techniques based on machine learning algorithms to just deliver more value to their products. And I'm hesitant to just name individual vendors, even though I just did so, because I think everyone's probably thinking about it or at least talking about it. But there's no one out there that's like the ultimate machine learning vendor, the ultimate vendor that's like figured all this out, as far as I'm concerned. Thanks for your insight, Seamus. That brings us to our 45-minute time point. I want to be sensitive to everyone's time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today's event. I do hope that you will check out the follow-up email from EMA. As I mentioned, it will include the on-demand playback as well as more information about this new research report. And I hope that we'll see you at a future event. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.